The warning lights flashed red as the cryo-chamber hissed open, releasing centuries of frozen sleep into the sterile air of the Nexus detention facility. Dr. Elena Vasquez watched nervously as prisoner designation X7749 began to stir, his vital signs spiking on her monitors. The Dominion Council had been explicit in their orders. Awaken, the ancient human for questioning about the location of the resistance weapon caches. But as the prisoner's eyes snapped open, eyes that burned with an intelligence that should have been dulled by 300 years of neural suppression, Elena realized they had made a catastrophic error. The man sitting up in the chamber wasn't just any prisoner. He was Marcus Reid, the legendary architect of humanity's original rebellion. The one mind the Dominion had spent centuries ensuring would never wake up. And now, as his lips curved into a knowing smile that sent chills down her spine, Elena understood with terrifying clarity that they had just unleashed the one person capable of destroying everything they had built. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sensation returned to Marcus Reid's body like electricity flowing through dead circuits. First his fingertips, tingling with pins and needles as circulation slowly resumed. Then his toes, cramped and numb from whatever eternity he'd spent in darkness. The burning cold in his lungs hit next as the cryo-fluid drained from his system, forcing him to cough violently as his body remembered how to breathe. The taste of copper and antiseptic chemicals filled his mouth, making him gag. As he fought to focus his vision on the impossibly bright white ceiling above him. Vital signs stabilizing, a woman's voice said somewhere to his left, crisp and professional. Neural activity is unusual, higher than expected for a standard revival. His brain patterns don't match the suppression protocols. Marcus turned, his head slowly, his neck muscles screaming in protest after what felt like an eternity of absolute stillness. Every movement sent sharp pains through his joints, but he forced himself to assess his surroundings. A woman in a pristine white lab coat stood beside his cryopod, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp angles of her face. Silver neural implants traced elegant, flowing patterns along her temples, disappearing behind her ears, technology he definitely didn't recognize. The implants pulsed with a soft blue light, synchronized with her heartbeat. Behind her, the room stretched far larger than any detention facility he remembered from his capture. The space was cavernous, with a curved ceiling that seemed to go on forever. Multiple levels of walkways and observation decks created a complex maze of steel and glass above them. Everything was too clean, too perfect, too advanced for a simple prison medical bay. "Where am I?" Marcus asked, his voice coming out as a raspy whisper that barely qualified as human speech. "Nexus Station, Sector 7 Detention Wing," Dr. Vasquez replied without looking up from her tablet, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface that materialized in the air. "You've been in cryostasis as per Dominion Protocol 15 Alpha. I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez, Chief Medical Officer for this facility." Something was fundamentally wrong. The walls around him weren't the rough concrete and rusted metal bars of the underground Republican prison where he'd been captured after the failed assault on the Capitol complex. Instead, they were smooth surfaces of some kind of advanced alloy, embedded with countless screens displaying streams of data in symbols and languages he didn't recognize. Mathematical equations, star charts, and what looked like population statistics scrolled past in an endless stream. The air itself felt different, cleaner than anything he'd ever breathed, but somehow artificial, processed through systems couldn't begin to understand. Dominion? Marcus struggled to sit up, his arms shaking with the effort. What happened to the Republic? Where's President Chun? What about the resistance cells in the outer colonies? Dr. Vasquez paused, her fingers hovering over her tablet. A flicker of something: confusion? Fear? Recognition? crossed her face before she quickly composed herself. The Republic fell centuries ago, prisoner. The Dominion has maintained peace and order across all inhabited territories since the unpleasantness was resolved. Marcus's blood ran cold. Centuries? That was impossible. He was supposed to be transferred to a maximum security facility on Europa for enhanced interrogation about resistance weapon caches, not frozen for hundreds of years. His last clear memory was of Dominion soldiers storming his cell, of Dr. Krieg's sadistic smile as they prepared the neural suppressors. The plan had been imprisonment, torture, maybe execution, not whatever this was. But as he looked more closely at Dr. Vasquez, at the impossible technology surrounding him, and at the two figures standing silently by the massive reinforced door, the terrible truth began to crystallize in his mind. The guards wore armor unlike anything from his time, sleek, form-fitting suits that seemed to anticipate their movements, with helmets that completely obscured their faces behind reflective visors. Energy weapons hung at their sides, weapons that hummed with barely contained power. Through the transparent walls of his medical bay, Marcus could see other cryopods stretching into the distance, rows upon rows of them disappearing into shadow. Some were active, their occupants floating in suspended animation, while others stood empty and dark. How many people were frozen here? How many like him had been deemed too dangerous to remain conscious? The neural suppressors, Marcus said suddenly, his voice stronger now. They should have worked. Standard protocol was to suppress higher brain functions in political prisoners. Dr. Vasquez's tablet slipped from her hands, clattering to the floor. How do you know about neural suppressors? That technology was classified above your clearance level. Because I helped design the countermeasures, Marcus said quietly, watching her face go pale. Along with the encryption protocols for the resistance communication networks, the stealth technology for our ships, and the quantum entanglement systems that made faster-than-light coordination possible. The two guards by the door shifted slightly, their hands moving toward their weapons. Dr. Vasquez took a step backward, her eyes wide with dawning horror. Check your records, Marcus continued, sitting up fully now despite the protest from his atrophied muscles. Check them very carefully. Because I think you're about to discover that whoever ordered my revival just made the biggest mistake in Dominion history. This wasn't a detention facility. This was something far worse, a monument to the complete and total victory of everything he had spent his life fighting against. And from the look of growing terror on Dr. Vasquez's face, they had no idea who they had just awakened. Dr. Vasquez's hands trembled as she activated her neural interface, her eyes glowing with the soft blue light of data retrieval. Marcus watched. Her face transformed from confusion to horror as she accessed files that had been buried in the deepest archives of Dominion security databases. Impossible, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the medical equipment. The records. They're sealed under Omega-class classification. I shouldn't even be able to see these files. But you can see them, Marcus said, swinging his legs over the edge of the cryopod despite the weakness in his muscles. Because someone with very high clearance ordered my revival. Someone who thought 3 centuries was long enough to ensure I was no longer a threat. The larger of the two guards stepped forward, his energy weapon now drawn and humming with deadly power. Prisoner will return to containment position immediately. Marcus ignored him completely, his attention focused on Dr. Vasquez as she continued to read. Tell me what you're seeing, Doctor. Tell me what really happened to the Republic. The Titan War, she said, her voice hollow with shock. It lasted 17 years after your capture. The Republic forces held out longer than anyone predicted, using advanced tactics and technology that Command could never figure out. They had ships that could disappear from sensors, communication networks that couldn't be cracked, weapons that adapted faster than our countermeasures. She looked up at him with dawning understanding. You designed all of it. Marcus nodded grimly. The Prometheus Protocol. I spent 10 years developing those systems before the Republic even knew they'd need them. Quantum encrypted communications, adaptive stealth fields, self-modifying weapon algorithms. Everything designed to be one step ahead of conventional military thinking. The casualties. Dr. Vasquez's voice broke as she continued reading. Over 2 billion dead across 15 star systems. The Republic refused every surrender offer. They said they'd rather die free than live as slaves. And did they? Marcus asked quietly. Die free? The final battle was at Earth itself. President Chun's last transmission was broadcast across the entire Republic network before. She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. Before the planet was sterilized. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Earth, gone. The cradle of humanity, reduced to a dead rock floating in space. His wife Sarah had been there, working as a medical researcher in the Geneva Medical Complex. His daughter Emma, only 8 years old when he'd been captured, had been attending school in the Pacific City Education Dome. All of them, gone. How many survived? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. The Dominion records show approximately 40 million Republic citizens were relocated to work colonies after the sterilization. Dr. Vasquez said, her professional facade cracking completely. But the integration protocols were extensive. Memory modification, behavioral conditioning, neural implants to ensure compliance. Within a generation, most had forgotten they were ever anything but loyal Dominion citizens. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on him. Everything he had fought for, everyone he had loved, all of it swept away while he slept in frozen darkness. The Republic's ideals of freedom and self-determination had been crushed beneath the boot of authoritarian control. But that's not the worst part, Dr. Vasquez continued, her voice growing stronger as she accessed deeper files. The Dominion won, but they never stopped being afraid. Afraid of the technology you created. Afraid of the ideas you represented. They spent centuries hunting down every trace of Republic innovation, every hint of dissent. They rebuilt human society from the ground up, designed to be stable, predictable, controllable. She gestured to the vast cryo facility around them. This entire station exists because of you. The Nexus Project, a prison for dangerous ideas. Anyone who shows signs of independent thinking, anyone who questions the system, anyone whose neural patterns match pre-Dominion baselines gets frozen until they can be properly evaluated. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus stood up slowly, his legs shaking, but his resolve hardening. Through the transparent walls, he could see hundreds of cryopods stretching into the distance. Hundreds of people whose only crime was thinking for themselves. How many are there? Across all 7 Nexus stations? Nearly 500,000 in long-term storage, Dr. Vasquez said. Scientists, artists, philosophers, engineers, anyone whose mind works the way minds used to work. The way your mind works. And you help them do this, Marcus said, not accusingly, but with genuine curiosity. Why, Doctor? Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, her neural implants flickering as she processed the question. Because until 10 minutes ago, I believed it was necessary. I believed the old ways were chaos, that freedom led to war and suffering. I believed the Dominion brought peace. She looked around the medical bay with new eyes. But now I'm looking at a man who was supposed to be broken by neural suppression, whose mind should have been wiped clean centuries ago, and I'm realizing that maybe we've been the ones living in a prison. The guard with the drawn weapon spoke into his comm unit. Command, we have a situation in Medical Bay 7, requesting immediate backup and authorization for maximum containment protocols. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since awakening, it was genuine. Too late for that, You made your mistake when you brought me back online. Every second I'm conscious, every system I interact with, I'm learning about your networks. Your security protocols are impressive, but they're designed to stop conventional threats. What do you mean? Dr. Vasquez asked. I mean I'm not a conventional threat, Marcus said, his eyes beginning to glow with the same blue light as her neural implants. I'm a ghost in your machine, Doctor. And I've been awake just long enough to start remembering how to haunt. Alarms began to sound throughout the facility as Marcus Reid, architect of humanity's last free civilization, began to understand exactly what 3 centuries of authoritarian rule had built, and how completely unprepared they were for someone who remembered what freedom looked like. The alarms piercing through Nexus Station suddenly cut off, replaced by an eerie silence that made Dr. Vasquez's skin crawl. Emergency lighting bathed the medical bay in pulsing red, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Marcus stood perfectly still, his eyes closed, neural patterns flowing across his temples in patterns she'd never seen before. That's impossible, she whispered, checking her readings. You can't interface with our systems without proper implants. Your implants are just crude copies of Republic technology, Marcus said without opening his eyes. Technology I helped design. The Dominion reverse-engineered what they could salvage, but they never understood the underlying principles. The larger guard pressed his comm unit again. Command, respond. We need immediate backup in Medical Bay 7. Static was his only answer. He looked to his partner, who was frantically trying to reach the command center through his own channels. The station's communication grid is experiencing difficulties, Marcus said with a slight smile. Nothing permanent, just enough interference to buy us some time. Dr. Vasquez backed away from him, her scientific mind warring with growing fear. What are you doing to our systems? I'm remembering, Marcus said simply. Every piece of technology in this facility is based on Republic innovations. Your quantum processors, your neural networks, your cryosystems, all of it evolved from designs I helped create. It's like coming home to a house built with your own blueprints. A soft chime echoed through the bay as one of the nearby cryopods began its revival sequence. Then another. And another. Dr. Vasquez watched in horror as a dozen pods throughout the facility started warming up simultaneously. Stop this immediately, the first guard shouted, raising his energy weapon. Return to your pod or we will, the weapon powered. Down with a disappointed whine. The guard pulled the trigger repeatedly, but nothing happened. His partner's weapon suffered the same fate, their energy cells somehow completely drained. You're making a mistake, Dr. Vasquez said, her voice steady despite her fear. The people in those pods are dangerous. They're there for the safety of society. Dangerous how? Marcus asked, opening his eyes to look at her directly. Because they asked questions? Because they thought for themselves? Because they remembered what it was like when humans had choices? The first cryopod finished its cycle, and a woman in her 30s sat up coughing, her long red hair plastered to her skull with revival fluid. She looked around in confusion before her eyes focused on Marcus. You're not supposed to be awake, she said, her voice hoarse but alert. None of us are supposed to be awake. Things change, Marcus replied. What's your name? Dr. Kara Chun, she said, swinging her legs out of the pod. Quantum physicist, University of New Shanghai. I was arrested for publishing papers on faster-than-light communication theory. She paused, studying his face. You look familiar. Have we met? Perhaps. I'm Marcus Reid. Kara's eyes widened in shock. The Marcus Reid? The architect of the Prometheus Protocol? But you're supposed to be dead. The histories say you died during the Titan War. The histories lie about a lot of things, Marcus said as more pods opened and their occupants began to stir. How long? Do you remember being here? 6 months, maybe 7, Kara said, then frowned. But that can't be right. The technology here is far more advanced than anything from my time. Dr. Vasquez checked her tablet with shaking hands. According to your file, Dr. Chun, you've been in cryostasis for 43 years. The shock on Kara's face was mirrored by the other prisoners as they awakened. An elderly man with kind eyes and calloused hands introduced himself as Professor James Wright, a historian who'd been frozen for teaching unauthorized versions of pre-Dominion events. A young woman named Zoe Park had been a programmer arrested for creating subversive algorithms that promoted independent thinking. A middle-aged engineer called Victor Petrov had been frozen for designing unnecessarily efficient systems that questioned resource allocation protocols. Each story was the same: brilliant minds imprisoned for the crime of thinking freely, for asking questions the Dominion didn't want answered, for remembering that humanity had once been different. "This is madness," Dr. Vasquez said, watching. As more pods throughout the facility began their revival sequences, "You're going to destabilize the entire sector. These people haven't been properly conditioned. They still carry dangerous ideas." "Dangerous to whom?" asked Professor Wright, his voice carrying the authority of decades spent teaching truth. "Dangerous to those who benefit from keeping humanity docile and controlled." "You don't understand," Dr. Vasquez said desperately. "The old ways led to chaos, war, suffering. The Dominion brought peace. At what cost?" Kara Chun asked, gesturing to the vast cryo-facility around them. "How many millions like us have been silenced? How many innovations have been suppressed? How much human potential has been frozen away because it threatened the status quo?" Marcus walked to the large viewing window that looked out over the main cryo-storage area. Hundreds of pods were now beginning their revival cycles, their occupants stirring to life after decades or centuries of forced sleep. "Dr. Vasquez, in your medical training, did you ever learn about the human immune system?" "Of course. Why?" "Because societies need immune systems too," Marcus said. "People who question, who challenge, who refuse to accept that things have to be the way they are." The Dominion didn't just conquer the Republic, they lobotomized human civilization. Victor Petrov, the engineer, was examining the door controls with professional interest. "Fascinating. The security systems are incredibly sophisticated, but they're all designed around predictable human behavior patterns. They assume prisoners will try to escape through conventional means." "Can you override them?" asked Zoe Park. "With the right access codes, perhaps." "But..." Victor looked at Marcus with sudden understanding. "You're not planning to escape, are you?" "You're planning something else entirely." Marcus nodded slowly. "There are 6 other Nexus stations across Dominion space. 500,000 people frozen for the crime of thinking freely. Scientists, artists, engineers, philosophers, the best and brightest of what humanity used to be. You want to wake them all," Dr. Vasquez whispered, the full scope of his plan beginning to dawn on her. "I want to remind humanity what it lost," Marcus said. "The Dominion spent 3 centuries creating a perfect, predictable society. But they made one crucial mistake: they preserved the very people who represent everything they tried to destroy." Professor Wright smiled, and for the first time in decades, it was the smile of a free man. An army of free thinkers, preserved in ice and ready to remember what freedom looks like. "This is insanity," Dr. Vasquez said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You'll start another war. Millions could die." "Millions are already dead," Marcus replied quietly. "They're just walking around, following orders, never knowing they could choose differently. At least in a war, they'll remember they have something worth fighting for." As if summoned by his words, new alarms began sounding throughout the station, not the security alerts from before, but something different. Emergency broadcasts crackled over the comm system as reports flooded in from across the facility. The awakening had begun. And for the first time in 3 centuries, the Dominion was about to face an enemy they thought they had eliminated forever: the uncontrollable, unpredictable, and utterly unstoppable force of human freedom. Marcus Reid, the last architect of liberty, had found his purpose again. And he was no longer alone. 3 hours after the first awakening, Nexus Station had transformed from a sterile detention facility into something resembling a university campus in revolution. The main cryo-storage area buzzed with activity as nearly 200 awakened prisoners worked with the focused intensity of minds that had been suppressed for far too long. Marcus stood at the center of it all, his consciousness interfaced with the station's central computer through jury-rigged neural connections that Kara Chen had helped him establish. Lines of code flowed across his vision as he mapped every system, every security protocol, every communication pathway the Dominion had built into their prison. "The quantum encryption is elegant," he said to Kara, who was monitoring his vital signs, "but it's based on algorithms I designed 2 centuries ago. They improved the efficiency, but they never changed the fundamental architecture. Can you break it?" asked Victor Petrov from his position at a hastily assembled workstation. The engineer had spent the last hour reverse engineering Dominion hardware with the enthusiasm of a child with new toys. "I don't need to break it," Marcus replied, his eyes glowing with neural interface activity. "I helped write the original protocols. Every system here has backdoors built into its Foundation Republic failsafes that the Dominion never knew existed." Dr. Vasquez watched from the sidelines, officially still their captor, but increasingly feeling like an observer to history. The transformation she'd witnessed in these people was unsettling. They moved with purpose, spoke with conviction, and tackled impossibly complex problems with the kind of collaborative efficiency she'd never seen in Dominion facilities. "This is unprecedented," she murmured to Professor Wright, who was organizing the awakened prisoners into specialized teams. "In 3 hours, you've accomplished more innovative work than most Dominion research stations manage in months." Wright smiled sadly. "That's what happens when you free minds that have been caged, Doctor. We're not just working, we're remembering what it feels like to think without restrictions." Zoe Park looked up from her programming station where she'd been adapting Republic software protocols to Dominion hardware. "Marcus, I've established secure connections to the other Nexus stations. The communication networks are more vulnerable than they realized. They never anticipated anyone with pre-Dominion access codes." "Excellent work," Marcus said, his consciousness splitting between multiple system interfaces simultaneously. "Professor Wright, what's the status on historical verification?" "Disturbing but useful," Wright replied, consulting notes written on salvaged tablet displays. "I've cross-referenced awakened prisoner testimonies with official Dominion records. The historical revisionism is extensive, but predictable. They've systematically erased or distorted any information about Republic innovations, pre-Dominion, human achievements, or evidence of resistance movements." A young woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, a neuroscientist who'd been frozen for conducting unauthorized research into consciousness expansion, looked up from her analysis of the neural suppression technology. "Marcus, I think I've figured out why the suppression protocols failed on you." "Show me," Marcus said, temporarily reducing his system interface activity to focus on her findings. "The neural suppressors work by identifying and dampening specific brainwave patterns associated with creative and independent thinking," Sarah explained, displaying brain scans on her improvised screen. "But your neural pathways are unusual. It's as if your brain learned to route around the suppression even while you were unconscious." Victor whistled in appreciation. "Adaptive neural architecture. Your mind literally evolved defenses while you slept. More than that," Sarah continued excitedly. "The suppression technology actually seems to have enhanced your natural abilities. It's like your brain used the 3 centuries to optimize itself for interfacing with quantum systems." Marcus paused his work, a strange expression crossing his face. "That's not evolution," he said slowly. "That's preparation." "What do you mean?" Dr. Vasquez asked, drawn into the conversation despite herself. Before my capture, I was working on a theoretical project called the Liberation Protocol, Marcus explained. A way to use the Republic's own technology to free human minds from any form of mental control or conditioning. I never finished it because the war escalated too quickly. Kara's eyes widened in understanding. You think your subconscious continued working on it during cryo-sleep? More than that, Marcus said, his interface connections blazing with renewed activity. I think the neural suppression technology inadvertently provided the final piece of the puzzle. Watch this. He gestured to one of the Dominion guards, who had been standing motionless since their weapons failed. The man's neural implants began to flicker, then suddenly blazed with bright blue light. The guard blinked, confusion replacing the blank compliance in his eyes. Where am I? The guard asked, his voice uncertain for the first time since Marcus had awakened. I remember being at the academy, but then, nothing. Years of nothing. Dr. Vasquez gasped. That's impossible. Full neural conditioning takes decades to reverse, if it can be reversed at all. Not if you know exactly how it was implemented, Marcus said, turning his attention to the second guard. Within moments, the same transformation occurred. The man looked around the room with growing horror as suppressed memories began to surface. My name is Lieutenant David Foster, the second guard said shakily. I was born on New Geneva Colony. I had a sister named Rachel. Why can't I remember what happened to her? Professor Wright approached the confused guards with gentle authority. Because they took those memories from you, Lieutenant. Just like they took them from millions of others. But we can help you remember. Word of Marcus's breakthrough spread quickly through the awakened prisoners. Within an hour, they had successfully reversed the conditioning of 12 Dominion personnel who had volunteered for the procedure. Each restoration revealed the same pattern. Bright, capable individuals whose memories had been selectively edited to ensure compliance. This changes everything, breathed Zoe Park. If we can reverse the conditioning remotely, we can free every human in Dominion space, Marcus finished, his eyes blazing with possibility. Every worker, every soldier, every administrator who thinks they chose this life, but was actually programmed to accept it. Dr. Vasquez sat down heavily, the implications overwhelming her. The social upheaval would be catastrophic. Billions of people suddenly remembering lives they thought were fiction, questioning everything they've been told to believe. Freedom is always catastrophic to those who profit from slavery, Professor Wright said gently. But it's also the only way humans can truly live. Marcus stood up from his interface station, his preparation complete. Victor, how long until you can establish quantum relay connections to the other Nexus stations? Give me 2 more hours. The engineer replied confidently. The hardware is more sophisticated than anything from our time, but the principles are the same. Excellent. Kara, can you adapt the Liberation Protocol for mass deployment? Already working on it, she said, her fingers flying across holographic interfaces. We'll need to be careful about the neural shock, but I think we can create a cascading effect through the Dominion's own communication networks. Dr. Vasquez, Marcus said, turning to face the conflicted medical officer. I need to ask you something important. She looked up at him with eyes that held decades of certainty, now shattered by hours of revelation. What? When you free the other Nexus stations, when you give 500,000 brilliant minds the choice to remember who they really are, will you help us? Or will you try to stop us? Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, watching the incredible work happening around her. Watching people who had been labeled as dangerous working together with a harmony and purpose she'd never seen in Dominion facilities. Watching former guards rediscover their humanity as their stolen memories returned. Finally, she stood up and walked to one of the interface stations. "Show me how the neural restoration works," she said quietly. "If I'm going to help free 500,000 people, I want to understand exactly what we're giving back to them." Marcus smiled, the first genuinely happy expression he'd worn since awakening. "We're giving them back their choice, Doctor. The right to think, to question, to dream, to fail, and to try again. We're giving them back their humanity." As if in response to his words, alarms began sounding throughout the station once again. But this time, they weren't warnings of malfunction or security breach. They were signals that Victor's quantum relays had successfully connected to the first of the other Nexus stations. The liberation of human consciousness was about to begin in earnest. And Marcus Reid, the architect of freedom, had just built the key that would unlock every cage the Dominion had created. The quantum relay connection to Nexus Station Epsilon had been active for exactly 17 minutes when the Dominion's response arrived with the fury of a collapsing star. Massive energy signatures detected. Victor Petrov shouted from his monitoring station, his voice cutting through the focused hum of liberation work. "Multiple capital ships dropping out of hyperspace. Looks like a full pacification fleet." Marcus felt his blood turn cold as he accessed the station's external sensors through his neural interface. 12 massive warships materialized in perfect formation around Nexus Station Alpha, their hulls gleaming with the distinctive black and gold of Dominion High Command. At their center loomed a vessel that dwarfed all the others, the Absolute Authority, flagship of Supreme Admiral Korath himself. "They're not here to negotiate," Dr. Vasquez said grimly, recognizing the formation patterns from her military history training. "That's a sterilization fleet. They're planning to destroy the entire station." Professor Reich looked up from coordinating the liberation efforts on Nexus Station Gamma. "How long do we have?" "Standard protocol for a sterilization order is a 30-minute warning," Vasquez replied, her hands shaking as she accessed tactical databases she'd hoped never to use. "They'll demand total surrender, then destroy everything regardless of our response." Marcus's consciousness expanded across multiple system interfaces simultaneously, his enhanced neural pathways processing information at superhuman speeds. "Victor, status on the quantum relay network?" 4 stations connected and actively liberating prisoners, the engineer reported tersely. "Stations Delta and Zeta are still coming online. If they destroy us now—" "They won't," Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "Not if we give them something they want more than our destruction." Dr. Sarah Kim looked up from her neuroscience station where she'd been refining. "The Liberation Protocol. What could they possibly want more than stopping us?" "Me," Marcus said simply. "Alive. Think about it. I'm the only person in the galaxy who fully understands Republic technology. They spent 3 centuries hunting down every trace of our innovations, but they never had the original architect to explain how it all worked." Main communication array crackled to life, filling the cavernous space with the cold, measured voice of Supreme Admiral Korath. "This is the Dominion vessel Absolute Authority addressing the criminal elements aboard Nexus Station Alpha. You have stolen property belonging to the state and committed acts of terrorism against lawful authority. You will surrender immediately and prepare for enhanced interrogation." Marcus walked to the central communication console, his team watching with a mixture of awe and terror as he prepared to gamble everything on a single desperate play. "This is Marcus Reid, architect of the Prometheus Protocol and the last free citizen of the Republic," he said, his voice carrying across space to the man who had spent his entire career hunting Republic remnants. "I'll come aboard your ship willingly, Admiral, but only if you guarantee the safety of everyone on this station." The silence that followed stretched for what felt like eternity. When Korath's voice returned, it was carefully controlled, but Marcus could hear the barely contained excitement beneath the words. "The notorious Marcus Reid. I had begun to believe you were merely a legend created by Republic propagandists." Very well, you have 15 minutes to present yourself at our docking bay. In exchange, the prisoners will be returned to their pods unharmed. He's lying, Zoe Park said fiercely. The moment you're aboard that ship, they'll destroy this place. Anyway, I know, Marcus replied calmly. But they don't know what I've actually been doing for the past 6 hours. Kara Chun's eyes widened as understanding dawned. The Liberation Protocol, you've been seeding it throughout their fleet's communication systems. Marcus nodded, his neural interfaces blazing with activity as he made final preparations. Every transmission they've sent, every data packet they've received, every routine system update they've processed since arriving, all of it carrying Liberation Protocol code fragments. Their own ships are now weapons against their conditioning. Dr. Vasquez stared at him in amazement. You're going to free their entire crew? Better than that, Marcus said, disconnecting from the interface array with visible effort. I'm going to give them back their choice. Some will choose to keep serving the Dominion, that's their right. But others will remember who they were. Before the conditioning, what they dreamed of becoming, what they lost when their minds were reshaped for compliance. Victor was frantically working at his station, sweat beading on his forehead. Marcus, the quantum relays to the other stations aren't stable enough yet. If something happens to you before we can complete the network, then you'll have to finish it without me. Marcus interrupted. Kara, how long until the protocol can execute independently? Another hour at minimum, she replied, her fingers dancing across multiple interfaces simultaneously. The neural pattern matrices are incredibly complex. You don't have an hour, interrupted Lieutenant Foster, the former guard whose conditioning Marcus had reversed. I know Admiral Koreith's tactics. He's not planning to interrogate you on his ship. He's planning to transfer you directly to the Mind Forge. Dr. Vasquez went pale. The Mind Forge is just a legend. It's real, Foster said grimly. A mobile, neural extraction facility designed to completely dismantle a consciousness and harvest every memory, every piece of knowledge, every thought. They built it specifically for capturing high-value Republic targets. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. If Koreith succeeded in extracting everything Marcus knew about Republic technology, the Dominion would gain access to innovations they'd spent centuries trying to recreate. More importantly, they'd learn exactly how the Liberation Protocol worked and how to counter it. New plan, Marcus said, his voice hardening with resolve. Kara, can you accelerate the protocol deployment? If I bypass the safety protocols and push the neural interface systems past their design limits, maybe, she said uncertainly. But the feedback could be catastrophic. The quantum resonance could destroy your consciousness entirely. And if I let them take me to the Mind Forge, they'll extract everything anyway, Marcus pointed out. At least this way, humanity has a chance. Professor Wright stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades studying the consequences of difficult choices. Marcus, there might be another way. What if you don't go alone? Explain. The Liberation Protocol works by reminding people who they really are, Wright said, his eyes gleaming with inspiration. But you've been doing more than just freeing individuals. You've been teaching them to free others. Every person you've restored has learned the process, internalized it, become a living transmission node for liberation. Zoe Park caught on immediately. A distributed consciousness network. If we could synchronize the protocol activation across multiple volunteers, the neural load would be shared among dozens of minds instead of concentrated in one. Sarah Kim finished excitedly. It's incredibly dangerous but theoretically possible. Marcus looked around at the faces of his ally scientists, engineers, historians, programmers, and even former guards who had rediscovered their humanity. All of them brilliant minds, who had been imprisoned for the crime of thinking freely. All of them now willing to risk everything for the chance to give that freedom to others. How many volunteers would we need? He asked. At least 30 for a stable network, Kara calculated rapidly. But Marcus, the volunteers would be essentially sacrificing their individual consciousness to become part of a collective liberation. Matrix, they might not survive the process intact. The decision hung in the air for a moment that felt like forever. Then, one by one, hands began to rise throughout the room. Viktor Petrov raised his first, followed by Professor Wright, then Zoe Park, Sarah Kim, and dozens of others. Even Dr. Vasquez, after a moment's hesitation, raised her hand. "We didn't ask to be heroes," Professor Wright said quietly. "We just wanted to think freely. But if this is what it takes to give that gift to everyone else, then we do it together." Marcus finished, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't felt in centuries. The final countdown began. Outside the station, Admiral Koreth's fleet powered their weapons, ready to enforce compliance through annihilation. Inside, 37 of humanity's finest minds prepared to merge their consciousness into a single, unstoppable force of liberation. Marcus Reid, the last architect of freedom, was about to discover that he had never been alone, and that the price of liberty was always worth paying when shared among those who understood its true value. The greatest gamble in human history was about to begin. The 37 volunteers stood in a perfect circle around the central neural interface array, their hands linked, their minds already beginning to synchronize through the quantum relay network. Marcus felt their consciousness merge with his Victor's engineering precision, Kara's scientific brilliance, Professor Wright's historical wisdom, Dr. Vasquez's newfound conviction, and dozens of others who had chosen freedom over safety. Network stability at 97%, Kara reported. Her voice strangely harmonized as multiple minds spoke through her. Liberation protocol ready for galaxy-wide deployment. Outside, Admiral Koreth's fleet had powered their weapons to full charge. "Marcus Reid, your time is up. Surrender now, or we will fire." Marcus smiled, feeling the collective strength of humanity's greatest minds flowing through him. "Admiral, you made a mistake 3 centuries ago when you froze us instead of killing. US, today you made an even bigger one." "What are you talking about?" "You brought your entire fleet within range of our transmission array," Marcus replied, his consciousness expanding across dimensions the Dominion had never imagined possible. "Every ship, every crew member, every neural implant in your fleet is about to remember what freedom feels like." The liberation protocol activated like a supernova of pure consciousness. From Nexus Station Alpha, waves of liberation energy cascaded through the quantum network, reaching the other 6 stations instantaneously. 500,000 awakening minds suddenly remembered who they had been before the Dominion stole their thoughts, their dreams, their choices. But the protocol didn't stop there. It flowed through the Dominion fleet's own communication systems, carrying the gift of remembrance to every crew member aboard every ship. On the bridge of the Absolute Authority, Admiral Koreth watched in horror as his officers began to blink in confusion, their neural implants flickering as suppressed memories flooded. "Back, sir," his tactical officer said uncertainly. I remember having a daughter on Kepler Colony. But the records say I never had children." "Why would I believe?" The man's voice broke as tears began streaming down his face. "Her name was Anna. She loved to paint pictures of stars." What happened to her? Across the fleet, the same scene played. Out on every ship, soldiers remembered families they thought were fantasies. Engineers recalled innovations they'd been conditioned to forget. Commanders questioned orders they'd followed without thought for decades. The protocol didn't stop with the fleet. It spread through every communication relay, every data network, every quantum transmission array the Dominion had built. On worlds across the galaxy, humans working in factories suddenly stopped their tasks and looked around in bewilderment. On colony ships, crews began asking why they were traveling to destinations they'd never chosen. On Earth's orbital platforms, administrators started questioning why their homeworld was a barren, Wasteland. Marcus felt the collective awakening of billions of minds through the quantum network. Each restored consciousness sent feedback through the liberation protocol, strengthening it, amplifying it, until the wave of freedom became unstoppable. Impossible, Admiral Korath whispered, watching his perfect fleet descend into chaos as his crew rediscovered their humanity. The conditioning was absolute. It cannot be broken. You never understood the most important thing about humans, Marcus replied, his voice now carrying the harmonized tones of 37 liberated minds. We're not designed to be perfect. We're designed to choose, even if we choose badly. Even if we make mistakes, even if our choices lead to chaos. That's what makes us human. On Nexus Station Beta, 50,000 awakened prisoners stood in the observation decks, watching as Dominion patrol ships powered down their weapons, their crews refusing orders to fire on civilian targets. On Station Gamma, brilliant scientists who had been frozen for dangerous research began broadcasting their discoveries across open networks, sharing knowledge the Dominion had tried to bury. Dr. Vasquez, or the part of the collective consciousness that had once been Dr. Vasquez, accessed the station's historical databases and began transmitting the true history of the Republic, the real story of Earth's destruction, the evidence of 3 centuries of systematic oppression. The lies that had held the Dominion together for generations crumbled as the truth spread faster than their sensors could contain it. Admiral, Marcus said gently, feeling genuine pity for the man who had spent his life serving a system built on stolen minds. Your fleet is welcome to stay and help coordinate the transition to freedom. Or you can leave and report to your superiors that the age of human subjugation is over. The choice for the first time in your life is truly yours. Korath looked around his bridge at officers who were remembering what it felt like to question orders, to think independently, to choose their own paths. Some would remain loyal to the Dominion, but they would do so by choice rather than conditioning. Others were already removing their rank insignia, their faces bright with the joy of rediscovered autonomy. Stand down all weapons, Korath ordered quietly. All ships, stand down. The collective consciousness that had been 37 individuals began to separate slowly, carefully, each mind intact but forever changed by the experience of true unity. Marcus opened his eyes, his own eyes, to find himself surrounded by exhausted but triumphant allies who had risked everything for humanity's freedom. Status report, he said, his individual voice sounding strange after hours of collective harmony. All 7 Nexus stations fully liberated, Victor reported with a tired smile. Quantum relays stable across 47 star systems. Conservative estimates suggest over 2 billion humans have experienced spontaneous memory restoration in the last hour. Professor Wright was coordinating with awakened historians across the galaxy. The truth about pre-Dominion humanity is spreading faster than they can suppress it. People are remembering art, music, literature, philosophy, entire cultures that were erased from official records. And the Dominion response? Marcus asked. Chaos, Zoe Park said with satisfaction. Half their administrative staff has quit. Their military units are refusing questionable orders, and their colony governors are facing populations that suddenly remember they used to have choices. Dr. Vasquez approached Marcus, her face showing the exhaustion of someone whose entire worldview had been rebuilt in a single day. What happens now? Billions of people are free for the first time in their lives, but they have no idea how to use that freedom. Marcus looked out through the observation windows at the stars beyond, where humanity was just beginning to remember what it meant to reach for the impossible. Now we teach them, he said simply. We help them remember not just who they were, but who they could become. We show them that freedom isn't the absence of order. It's the right to choose what kind of order they want to create. The man who had awakened as prisoner X7749 was no longer the last free human in the galaxy. Marcus Reid had become the first teacher in humanity's greatest classroom. where billions of students were about to learn the most important lesson of all, that the power to choose their own destiny had been inside them all along, the age of human. Freedom had begun again, and this time, they would never let anyone take it away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.